Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. I think a good metaphor for this show is a road that you're traveling down and you see this interesting exit you come up to and you decide, well, I'm not really sure what's down this exit, but I'm going to take it anyway and I'm going to find out what's at the end of the exit. And lo and behold, most of the exits we take on this program lead to some very mysterious and interesting people we get to talk to. So I'm Dan Hall, one of your hosts, and with me tonight is my longtime co-host, Dave. How long have we been doing this program? I was thinking about
Think
that the other day.
since 2011, I believe,
Yeah, oh my
2010
God.
even maybe. So it's
Yeah,
it's just been a hobby for the most part, but I think we've knocked out 130 some shows, and I think that's more than a hobby. That's kind of an obsession, possibly. But
yeah.
it's fun, and we keep meeting interesting people who share the same interests and who've had experiences that Dan and I, have not had. And that's how we learn, from talking to people like our guest here, who goes by Deb. And
Yeah, tonight's guest is Deb Kauble, and I was talking to her before Dave came on. Deb was the feature, well, let's say maybe featured, it's not the right word, the main character in Budd Hopkins' book in the TV miniseries Intruders. And I was talking to her. I watched Intruders last night for the first time since it's came out, and she has a very compelling story to tell us. So, Deb, welcome to Anomalies.
Thanks for having me, you guys. I appreciate it.
Sure, we feel blessed that you're here.
Yeah.
Um, there's so much to say about you. You've been an experiencer. You've been, and some people like the word contactee, experiencer. I don't know if there's a politically correct way to say that. You've been a MUFON field investigator. That's something I did for a while. You have your own podcast. You're a person of all trades. So let's start with, I heard another interview that you did, and the interview started with you explaining your experience as a phone call that kind of starts the ball rolling. A phone call from your mom about something that was going on in her yard. So why
Mhm.
don't you start there? Because that might be a good tipping off point.
Well, that's the actual experience that the book Intruders is actually written around. Um, so yeah, that's a good starting point. It isn't when it started for me. It started for me when I was a young child, but that was like the pivotal point. That one thing that happens to you, like when you see the Challenger explode, or you heard Kennedy was shot, and it hits you and it stays with you. That incident has been mine and stayed with me. I was a single parent, and I had just moved back home from my I was getting a divorce and moved back home to my parents' house with my kids. And I was preparing myself to go cut some patterns with a gal that lived behind us that was my friend. And I was standing at the kitchen uh, sink, washing my hands, looking out the window, and I noticed a light in the pump house of the swimming pool behind the house. And I mentioned it to my mom, and she said not to worry about it. So I left. Before I drove off, though, I did decide to drive down the side drive and around the turnaround and just have a look at the back of the house and the workshop back there before I took off. Because my father had a lot of expensive Indian motorcycles that he restored back there. And, I was thinking of prowlers and burglars back there. Certainly not non-human intelligence. Okay. So I didn't see anything. So I went on ahead over to Deanna's. And then as soon as I got there, I called mom and I told her I didn't see anything, but I did note that the pedestrian door to the garage that was attached to the house was open. And I knew that had been closed earlier. And she again said, don't worry about it. Your dad will be home soon. He worked second shift at a factory close to home at that time. So she said, he'll be home when he'll take care of it when he gets home. I'll just lock the doors, because I told her I was kind of worried about, prowlers.
Mhm.
So I hung the phone up, and then immediately she calls right back, like immediately. And she says, I need you to come home right now. And she sounded scared. or uneasy. And that was not like my mom, because my mom didn't scare easily. And so I said, well, why, what's wrong? And when I said that, my girlfriend's husband heard me, and he hollered over my shoulder, tell her to call the police. That's what we pay him for. And she said, no, I don't want anybody here but you. And I'm like, okay. So I got in my car and I told my friends, I'll be back. I'll be back. I'm going to just make sure everything's all right. And I left. Take a couple minutes to get home because they were just one street behind and a little bit down from my parents. So I got there and I pulled up to the side drive and got out. And my mom was standing in the doorway of the Florida room, as we called it. And I stepped into that and I grabbed the shotgun that my dad had stashed next to the trash compactor out there. And my mom says to me, you know, that's not loaded right. And I said, yeah, I know, but whoever's out there doesn't.
They don't know. They don't.
Oh, I think I said something along the lines of I can get close enough to them to hit them with them before they figure out it's not loaded or something like that. And the fact that I even went out there then, I was like 23 years old and I was a very timid and shy person. And it still amazes me when I think that I actually did that, went out there and walked around looking for prowlers. But I did. I went out, I checked the pump house. I went back by the my dad's workshop and made sure the doors were shut. I happened to note that my dog, who was in the garage, or should have been in the garage, but the door was open, was under my dad's ladder truck, and she would not come out. So I'm like, whatever. I left her and I walked back to the garage that was attached to the house. I walked in that open pedestrian door, and I thought, if there's anybody hiding in here, it's got to be behind this mattress that was leaned up against the wall, because Mom's car was in the driveway. There wasn't any cars in there. And just about the time I started to look behind that mattress, I started feeling like I was on fire. I felt like my skin started burning. I felt like a hot flash. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I got to get out of here. And I headed to the door. And when I got to the open doorway, something hit me. The best way I can describe it is, in my mind, it was like getting hit by lightning. I mean, it was like a punch in the chest right here, and it spread through my arms and my legs. The light was so intense and white, and I know my eyes were shut and I could still see it. I couldn't get away from it. I couldn't move. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm dying, or I'm dead. This is what it feels like to be dead. And then I feel someone pull my shoulder from behind me, but I don't see anybody and I can't see. But I feel someone tug on my shoulder behind me, and I feel like it's burning sensation in my ear on this side. And then it started to vibrate. My whole body started to shake, and it went from shaking to vibrating to the point where it felt like I could almost feel every individual molecule of myself vibrate independently. And I have no idea how much time passed how long I was in this condition and this was happening. I couldn't see anything. And then the next memory I have is being out through the doorway on the patio, the cement patio. And the vibrating stops, the shake, and it finally slows down and calms down. I still can't move. I don't know how I got from the doorway to out on the patio. And the brightness of the light started to wane, but I still couldn't see. It was like my vision had like white splotches in them, like flashbulb splotches, like if you get your picture taken, then you didn't blink and you happen to be looking right at it. It was like that. I could see movement in front of me out in the yard in several spots. And at one point I thought to myself, why are these kids in my mom and dad's backyard? Why are these kids in my mom's backyard? I thought they were little kids because they weren't very big. And they were almost like bullet shaped in that they were, big at the top and real narrow at the feet. and they all seemed to come from different points in the yard, and they were up towards the driveway, up to my right. And I remember thinking sometime during that point, oh my God, my kids. And then I heard a voice. I never saw anybody, but I heard a voice say that my kids were okay. Because my kids were in the house there with my mom, and these kids or whatever they were all kind of lined up by the driveway, and then they all just kind of slid down towards me, but not right to me, like just in front of me, but toward me. And at that point I noticed this ball of light, like about a basketball sized ball of light in the yard, maybe 20, 25 feet in front of me, something like that. And then it was about as high up off the ground as I am tall. I'm 5'3", 5'2", and it went down real slow, and then it came back up to where it was and stopped. And then I saw the thing that they were headed towards. I don't remember seeing them go in it. I don't know where they went. I don't know whatever happened to them. And I saw that thing and my mind just froze. I didn't want to look at it, but I didn't want to not see it because I needed to know where it was in relationship to where I was at all times. You know what I mean? And it wasn't very big. It was about the size of the pump house or the swimming pool, maybe a little bit taller, egg-shaped with like an egg sitting on the round, bigger bottom part, and then, sort of like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost thought at one point it maybe wasn't even touching the ground because it seemed like it kind of bobbled just a slight bit. And it had long, skinny things coming out the sides of it, but they didn't look sturdy enough to support it. So I'm not sure what they were. And in retrospect, Budd and everybody has for 40 years called it a craft. But, when I think about it, I can't even imagine how even 6 little kids could get in that thing and fly anywhere, let alone fly all the way across the galaxy or whatever. So I don't know exactly what that was in the yard, but I do know that it left a mark. We discovered about 48 hours later, a mark in the yard that snow melted off of that following fall, and grass, it took several years for the grass to grow back into it. The mark, it was about an 8-foot diameter circle, and it had a streak going off one side all the way up to the driveway that went across the whole back of the yard. And it was 49 feet long, about 2 feet wide, and ended in a perfect arc. We didn't see that till a couple of days later when the whole family came back out for 4th of July weekend. That night after I saw all that stuff, and then I heard a voice. My memory is really splotchy. I think I probably have about an hour and 10 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes of time that Budd has figured out between the time I left my friend's house to go investigate and when I contacted them again. But I only remember this little brief moment that I'm telling you now. I still don't remember most of it. The end of the memories came. The end of it all came when I heard my name. And it was like someone snapped their finger and I woke up. And I remember at that point being able to move, and I turned and I walked up to the lower patio, which I was on. I walked up the steps to the upper patio because it was a tri-level. And Mom was standing in the kitchen door on that upper patio, and she says, "Is everything okay?" And at that point I said, "Yeah, everything's cool." But I'm thinking to myself, I feel weird. I'm thinking, I feel weird and gross, and I don't want to sew anymore. So I contacted my friend. I'm like, I don't really feel like sewing anymore. I asked him if she wanted to come over and go swimming. And she's like, yeah, sure. And I can't remember whether I went back over there and then they came, or if she just came with her daughter, but they ended up back at Mom's house. And the 3 of us, me, my friend, and her daughter, who was maybe, I don't know, 10 or 12 or something like 13, were walking across the backyard to the pool. The girl steps on something in the yard. And at first we thought it was a bee or something. And we looked at her foot, But then she said her foot was getting numb, and then this numbness was going up her leg. And so we got in the pool because I remember her mom saying something about, well, the cold chlorine water, if it's a bee sting. We didn't see no stinger, so if it's a bee sting, that'll feel good on it, you know. And we were probably in the pool maybe 10 minutes or so. We weren't in there very long, and all three of us started getting nauseated, feeling crummy. And I started noticing my eyes. My eyes were burning, and my vision was getting weird. I was seeing white halos around all the lights in the backyard in the swimming pool area because it was dark, but by this time it was dark. And I had a headache. And so they left and I went to bed. But in the next morning when I woke up, and keeping in mind that whole thing with the little kids and the egg-shaped thing in the yard, I don't even remember it at this point in this whole thing. The next morning when I woke up, my eyes were swollen shut completely, and I was in misery. So my mom took me to the hospital emergency room. And what are the odds? We go to the hospital emergency room, and there's actually an eye doctor in there. I don't know why he was in there hanging around or whatever, but they had him come in and look at me. And he asked my mom if she could take me across the street to his office so he could examine me better there. He had his equipment there. So she did. And the first thing he asked me is, have you looked into the arc of a welder's torch?
Welder.
And I'm like, no. And at that time, I didn't remember that intense light that hit me and made me feel like I was dead. So I didn't say anything about that. And he gave me creams. He gave me a goo and some eye drops. And it seemed like it took a couple of weeks for my eyes to really heal up, but they were never right after that. I went farsighted real quick and had to start wearing glasses. Like I was a plus 2.75. Now I'm a plus 3. Well, I got a plus 2.75 now. But I went farsighted real quick after not having to wear glasses at all. And my eyes would burn and water for no reason. It would come and go. I started having swollen glands under my arms and my neck. I'd break out in these little crazy rashes across my cheek.
You know,
I,
what's interesting about that, the conjunctivitis kind of thing is, we've done some shows on the Mothman in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and many of the people that saw the Mothman and saw the UFOs that were prevalent in the Point Pleasant area, they suffered also from conjunctivitis.
And I'll tell you what, I ended up having cataracts in my mid 30s. I was like diagnosed with cataracts, and by the time I hit my late 40s, I had both my lenses replaced. So I have acrylic lenses, and I have macular degeneration. It's dry, and I'm being treated every 6 months. I get dilated, and I have to take the ARADs and stuff, and they watch me very closely. But I also started having ocular migraines, and in the migraines, I see auras of triangular prisms of light that swirl, and it's usually only on one side. So, and my MRI shows that I have scar tissue in that area, a bright spot. They said migraines can scar your brain. I did not know that. But all that started after. Now, I didn't, the eye stuff started right away. The ocular migraine started about, I'm going to say 7 or 8 years ago. There's not a headache pain with them. But the weird part is, after I stopped seeing the prisms, I'm blind for like 30 minutes. And it's the same white splotches in my vision that blind me that I had that night. So I can't prove that night messed my eyes up permanently, but I will always think in my mind that it did, because nobody else in my family has this problem. All these, not as young as certainly not as young as I was, and all the other health problems I had for that year afterwards. And the dog that had been out there that night that I found out in the underneath my dad's truck, by fall, she had to be put to sleep because all her hair fell out. At first we thought she had mange, but then she started having big black sores all on her back, and hair was coming out where she couldn't rub, and her teeth we'd find her teeth in the food bowl, and her eyes started whitening over. And the vet, we took her to the vet, and he put her down. I think that was so this happened in June 30th, and I think by September or October, Penny, we had to put her down. But so anyway, I woke up the next day, my eyes were a wreck, went to the doctor, got treated. Couple days passed. I could not sleep. I was having terrific anxiety and panic attacks, and I didn't know why. 4th of July weekend came. The whole family came over to swim because obviously we had the swimming pool. And all the kids ran out the back kitchen door to go to the pool. And my oldest nephew came back in and he said, "Grandma, what's wrong with your yard?" And she's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And so we all went out there, and sure enough, there was this mark. I mean, it was big. The grass was all grayish beige and just laid down. The dirt was like a rock, hard, and it was such an odd shape. And my mom pops out with, "Oh, that's where our UFO landed the other night." I'm like, "What?" And I looked over her, and I remember thinking, what? And she was kind of giggling, that like nervous giggle, and the kids were giggling, and I'm like, what are you saying?" And it was like somebody just pulled the finger out of the dike, and here came all kinds of memories, and it never stopped. I mean, and I started to remember that night. I started to remember the light. I remembered two big black eyes. That's all I could remember, two big black eyes. That's all I could see everywhere I looked when it started coming back to me. And I think I had a nervous breakdown I was the absolute basket case for several months after that. I had gotten Budd's book, Missing Time, out of the library a few months before, along with the stack of a whole bunch of other books. I was aware of UFOs, and I'd, of course, seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Daddy took us to the movies the Christmas Eve of '77 when it came out, and I was aware of Barney and Betty Hill. I'd seen that story on TV, but didn't have a lot of knowledge after that, about, certainly not what I know now. But I did pick up The Missing Time. Not quite sure exactly what it was about, but found it intriguing. I brought it home and had started to try to read it, but I could never finish it because I kept having panic attacks. I'd read a paragraph or two, or a chapter or something, and I couldn't finish. So I took it back to the library, but I knew that there was, in the back of the book, the address where you could write to this guy if you thought you had this kind of experience. And the more I thought about that night, coupled with the fact that I had an older sister who had reported seeing a UFO in 1965, that she did not have any qualms about telling anybody who would listen, and I had heard that my whole life and just assumed that, and still that she was telling the truth. She would have no reason to make up something like that. So between what I had experienced and what she had, I decided to write him a letter, took a bunch of pictures of the backyard. And I guess a few weeks later, Mom decided to finally mail it for me. She at first wasn't gonna, but because she's like, "I don't know if I want to open this can of worms or not." But she said, "I'm at the mailbox mailing bills one day, and something in my head says mail that letter." So I did. And then, I don't know, maybe a few weeks after that, I come home from being out one night with friends, and Mom said, "That guy who wrote that book called." And I'm like, "Oh, oh my gosh," I remember shaking. I remember shaking when I dialed. She said, "You could call him back." Because you guys got to remember, this was back in 1983. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have computers. I mean, we talked by mail, letters. or long distance phone calls that were brief and after 6 p.m. because they were expensive, you know. So my mom said, you can call him if you want, but don't be on the phone long. So I called, and I was, that's how it all started. That's how I met Budd. And that from that point on, you know, he began like a 2 or 3 year investigation into myself, other family members, friends, neighbors, you know, and ended up, he came to us a couple of years in, and he's like, I really want to write a book about this because this is an important case. You've got trace, you know, physical stuff. You've got physical damage to yourself. You have independent witnesses, because he found 2 different neighbors who witnessed something that night, plus mom. And he goes, I think this is important. And at first my family was like, I don't think so. Nah, because that was not the point. When I reached out to him, I just wanted help. I wanted to either be, you know, I wanted him to tell me either it's real, this is really happening, but you're going to be okay, or it's not really happening, you're going to be okay. You know, they make pills. I told the psychiatrist that he sent me to, they make pills for this, right? I could just take a pill and this will go away, right?
Let me ask a question about your sister.
Mhm.
You said your sister saw a UFO, but she didn't have any kind of an experience like you did, as far as you know. Is that correct?
I don't remember exactly what she told. I remember she taking my mom to the bingo game. She was only like 17. I mean, and she was 11 plus years older than me. So she had just gotten her driver's license, and she took mom and dropped her off at the bingo game. And on the way home, she said she suddenly felt this compulsion to pull into the parking lot of the Holy Spirit Church in Indy. And it was still daylight out in the afternoon. So she pulled into the church parking lot and drove around back behind the church. It's a large lot back there. And she said she put her car in parked, and she looked up, and there was a huge UFO right above her car with had colored lights going all the way around it. And then it picked her entire car up with her in it.
Wow.
Yeah. And now I don't remember what all she said happened after that.
Did
But
she ever explore that at all with
I,
Bud?
I, I think she did a little bit. And it's probably in Intruders,
Hmm.
but all I know is that her entity that she recalled us seeing looked more like a praying mantis than mine was just the little kids with the big head and the big eyes. And I've never seen, I don't think, the same thing she saw, but anyway, her next conscious memory, I think for a long time anyway, was waking up in her car in the parking lot of the church. The UFO's gone, but it's also now dark out, and it also is almost time to pick mom up from the bingo. So she leaves the parking lot and goes right back to the bingo hall, picks mom up. And mom said she's like chattering all the way home, telling mom about, this UFO that picked her car up out of the parking lot of the Holy Spirit Church, and she told the story. I was a little kid when that happened, but I always heard her telling it. And then some family members would make fun of her and laugh at her, and she'd get mad, and then she wouldn't talk anymore. So, but yeah. And that's the only time I ever heard her say, that's the only time I believe I remember her talking about like a UFO stuff. I've heard her talk about paranormal stuff happened to her, but that with the big UFO thing, that was in 1965.
Hmm.
Oh,
So would it be fair to say that several people within your family have had either UFO or whatever paranormal means, those
yeah.
kind of experiences?
Yeah, well, it'd be me and my sister, and then my mom, which I didn't even know about until Bud came and asked my mom if she had any weird stuff happen in her life. And she told him about a story about being chased through the woods by a little boy with big brown eyes and falling down. And I can't remember what else she said, but it wasn't too dramatic. But I'm like, Mom, you never told us anybody. We didn't know that.
Mhm.
And there's a lot about mom's family we don't know because she was adopted. So
Oh,
we don't know, you know, she was adopted by a US Army, I think he's a master sergeant in the Army, when she was 2 years old, out of a orphanage in Louisville, Kentucky. And they took her to Rhode Island, to the Philippines, to China. She lived in China
wow.
for 2 years. So, I mean, they took her all over the place, but we don't know about her. We don't know a whole lot about her
Mhm.
birth family. And then my dad, he's never said he saw anything like that that I'm aware of, but he's had a lot of psychic stuff happen to him, you know.
Yeah.
He says he can smell. He always used to say he could smell death,
Wow.
which yeah, it's kind of, I'm like, I don't really want to smell that, but
Yeah. I don't think I do either.
and then I have a younger brother and sister, and they've neither one of them have ever reported any like my older sister and I, but they have also had paranormal activity and stuff happen. And my little sister says that she talks to dead people. So
Could be.
could be, you know, and
Yeah.
I'm not judging anybody. I'm the last person on earth that should be.
Mhm.
And of course, my two sons, when they were little and we lived at my mom's house, they had some strange things happen to them, but they don't like to talk about it. They're grown men now. One's 40, one's going to be 47 in a month. My God, I'm old. And then the other one is 45, going to be 46. And he's more scared. Well, they're both scared of it. They don't want to talk about the time we lived, things that happened when we lived at mom's when they were little. They
Mhm.
remember it, but they don't want to talk about it. And
Yeah.
then my granddaughter, she's going to be 18 in September. And when she was probably 3 or 4, she had this episode of night terrors that she would wake up screaming bloody murder. And she told her father that uh, aliens were going to come. They were trying to come through her window and take her. And my son called me when she first started doing this because she used to come to my house every weekend. I would pick her up when I got off on Friday, and my husband and I would enjoy her and play and do things with her. And then I'd take her home on Sunday. And my son called me up absolutely fuming mad at me. And he said, Mom, what have you said? What have you told her? What have you done? Yeah, I'm like, I didn't do anything. I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I was freaking out. And he's told me what she said. And I'm like, oh my, I said, I have nothing to do with that. I swear to God. We had a rule. We didn't talk about it. We didn't watch anything on TV about it. Even when my kids were little, we didn't talk about it around them because A, we didn't want to scare them anymore and they were already scared. And B, we didn't want to contaminate their subconscious if they ever
Right.
wanted to do, you know, if they had something happen to them in the future. But mostly I just didn't want to scare them, you know. So that was the rule we had, and that's the rule Robbie had, and I honored that rule. And I have no idea, you know, if she got, I'm 99.9% sure she didn't see anything at my house or hear anything at my house because we didn't talk about this stuff, my husband and I. And it was probably 3 months or so, 3 or 4 months before it stopped. And my son, like, he got her special curtains to black out her room. He got her a nightlight. He got her a radio. He even made anti-alien, you know, alien go away spray with some Glade air freshener. And we would spray the
Really?
room every night. Yeah. I mean, because this kid was hysterical every night at bedtime.
Hmm.
And it finally stopped. And thank God he finally realized that I didn't have anything to do with it and let her start coming around again. And, you know, life carried on and she seemed fine. And then here, flash forward to she's probably 14 at this point. She's at my house. We're watching TV. The commercial for Ancient Aliens comes on, and I instinctively grab the remote and I go to change the channel, you know. And she turns and looks at me and she says, Nene, that's what she calls me. Do you believe in aliens? And I looked at her for a minute and I said, yeah. And that's it. I didn't say nothing else because I wasn't about to get in trouble again, you know.
Yeah.
But also, you know, no, I just said, yeah, I do. I said, yeah. And she said, good, so do I. And I said, okay. And that was it. No, the conversation went on and we've not ever talked about it since then. But I thought in my head, now she knows
Mhm.
that there is someone in the family she can talk to
About this, right?
if she ever feels like she needs to, and she
Yeah.
can be safe. What I wrote the book, Extraordinary Contact: Life Beyond Intruders. And it was published in 2021. I was for her as much as it was for all the people that I have tried over the last 40 years to help. It was as much for her. So she knows me, that side of me, where she comes from, who she comes from. And maybe it will give her some insight into her own life someday. But that was for her as much as anything. So
Dave, why don't you jump in here? So there's somebody beside me asking
Hmm.
Deb questions.
Well, I would like to go back to the actual physical effects that you endured, I should say. You mentioned vibrating. It seems I've had my share of concussions in my life through sports and so on, and just being a clumsy boy. And some of those things sound like concussion symptoms, the disintegrating of your visual field, of course, lights or blind spots. But unfortunately, it sounds like the doctor didn't really pursue anything beyond, like, I know he asked you that first question with did you look at a welder's torch? And it's like, well, no, okay. But what did happen? You were obviously affected by something, and it seems like some sort of technology. And I'm wondering, you also felt paralysis, right? At some point, or you didn't know where you were in space and time. It's I don't know what Budd wrote in the book because I think I read it, but it's been a long time ago. I haven't revisited. I'm curious to revisit it now, but I wonder if he concluded that you did, in fact, potentially dip into another dimension, or you had, some sort of dimension brought upon you, or some sort of screen memory was forced upon you. Um, but also, it seems like there's some radiation effects. I mean, do you think that you were irradiated at some level? I mean, could that explain some of the symptoms you had?
I have no idea. I don't know what it was that hit me. I don't know what it all had, what all it could have done to me. I know I can tell you the symptoms that I had after that, which I did,
Mhm.
but I don't know what caused it. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know what it was supposed to do. Like I said, there's no way those 6 kid size things could go
Mhm.
in there and fly anywhere. So I don't know what its actual purpose was. I don't know. And I don't even remember seeing them coming out of it or going in it. I don't even remember how I got from the opening of the garage door out onto the patio. And I don't know how long I was in the condition I was in. It seemed like, like I said, it's like time just stopped for me in some way. It's funny that you mentioned dimensional stuff because, I, based on some things I saw after that, and just things that I've been thinking about, and some lucid dreams I've had, and some, I don't know, thoughts that have come into my mind that, I've written down. I feel like uh, the majority of what I've had contact with it's not been extraterrestrial, like flying from another galaxy to here. It may be extraterrestrial. They may live on some other planet, but I think that they're dimensional beings of some kind. That's something. I did some EVPs. I started getting fascinated with the paranormal stuff. It was when Greg and I started the podcast, and I went from being a MUFON investigator and the nuts and bolts people to the paranormal investigator and all the woo-woo stuff that the nuts and bolts guys hate,
Mhm.
or they used to. But one of the first EVPs I caught was probably over 20 years ago. That I was really attracted to the electronic stuff and the manipulation of electronic stuff. And the first EVPs I caught was like a beautiful, perfect class A EVP. And it was of an old man's voice. And he was saying, "Are the spirits listening?" And another voice behind him that said, "Can I listen too?" And in that instant, when I heard that EVP, I had this epiphany, and I'm like, oh, I'm a spirit somewhere else. And there's somebody, I'm a spirit to somebody somewhere else. And they're trying to hear me. And it's like my mind just went poof,
Mhm.
and it ain't gotten, it just continued to go boop since then.
Yeah.
So,
It's
I
like
mean,
parallel dimensions. If you think
mhm,
about, if you really start thinking about this stuff, the possibilities can be endless. We could be living right next to people in infinite uh, dimensions,
mhm,
parallel, for lack of a better term, because you're obviously dealing not with three-dimensional space, but you're dealing with hyper-dimensional space, or something that we obviously don't understand very well. But that's what it seems like to me. And of course, based on lots of other experiences and experiencers we've talked to, something about our regular laws of physics fail in those moments. And you're either merging with their dimension, or they're manipulating our minds to create what is in essence a disconnect, or a something we don't know how to interpret. So we come up with screen memories, or we come up with interpretations that after the fact look ridiculous. You're like, what would the things coming out of the side of this craft, was
mhm,
that an actual physical thing that had a purpose, or was that your mind trying to grapple with the stuff that they're throwing at you? And that's the
mhm.
thing that's so frustrating about this whole phenomenon, is that
Yeah.
we cannot process. I have a feeling we have trouble processing things that we don't recognize in our dimension, and that affect us differently than what we expect. And so you come up with sort of crazy stuff. But that obviously doesn't mean that it didn't happen, at least partly, in our reality. And you have multiple witnesses. And I'm curious about your mother. She was involved in this. What did she ever remember or say about this whole incident?
She didn't say a whole lot. She told me about a week after the incident happened, after she'd called me home, she was standing at the kitchen window at the sink doing dishes, and she said, "Oh, I just remembered why I called you home that night, the other night." And I'm like, "Okay, why?" And she said, "I was standing here doing dishes and I saw a light around the bird feeder." She goes, "It's probably about that big, like a basketball." And she goes, "I thought at first maybe somebody had pulled in the driveway and it was like a headlight beam. Somebody's headlight was cockeyed." And she goes, "But I didn't see anybody." And then I worried that it was a flashlight. And that's when I got worried. And she said, "It stayed on the bird feeder, and then it got smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it disappeared." And she goes, "When it disappeared, that's when I got it in my head to call you to come home." And so I'm like, "Oh, okay." Because I'm thinking to myself, if you would have told me that, then I'd have been bringing Larry with me when I came back, and the gun
Mhm.
would have been loaded. So that, I mean,
She's
but
being a bit casual with the reference to, oh, that's where the UFO land. I mean,
I
so
know.
obviously
I don't even know. Yeah, I have
she
no idea
saw
why.
something, and you just explained the lengths to which you went to protect um,
Yeah, my dad's.
your granddaughter.
Oh, my
Yeah, I
granddaughter.
mean,
Yeah.
you went to great lengths to protect her from that. So it's
Hmm.
possible that your mother um, was merely trying to minimize it, so it reduced the intensity of it, or the scary aspect of it.
Hmm.
So I
But
just
she.
wondered, but you had multiple witnesses to this whole thing. So what
Mhm.
about the kids? I'm curious, your friends, the next day, did they have similar symptoms? Were they ill for a while? I mean, did they ever talk about that night?
Nope. Not. They didn't talk about that night in of aspect of them being sick or anything like that. Actually, we never talked really much. We didn't talk about it at all, which kind of bothered me in a way, because
Hmm.
when Bud came and for the first time and met everyone and was talking to I mean, he went and talked to neighbors, knocked on doors. Um, and my mom's like, "Oh my God, he's going to tell the neighbors, they're going to think we're crazy." But he was he interviewed my friend and her, I think her daughter was there, and her husband. And that's when he came to the determination that between the time I left their house to the time I contacted her and said, I don't want to sew anymore, it was about an hour and 15 minutes, something like that. And I thought, and even my friend was like, no way, there's no way it could have been that long. That I would have been worried about her. I would have called. And I thought, damn, my friends don't even care about me. Why didn't you call? I was gone an hour and a half. When I sat down and thought about the timeline, he was right. Based as mom confirmed that, but yet she's got gaps in her memory. Even the people that weren't in directly there, but I was in contact with, the street behind us, had gaps in there. They didn't realize that that much time had passed. It was like time changed for them or something. It's just,
Yeah,
and
it's so common. I mean, you hear it one time, you're just like, well, that's just mistake, mistaken. It was intense and you were worried. And so you're making mistakes in the timeline and whatever. But this is such a common thing, this missing time. And it happens in the vicinity of these things, whatever they seem to be changing space time in one way or another, or they're manipulating. I consider those two different things, although I mean, you could just, the effect is the same,
I agree with
your
you. I
mind
think
is
that
being affected by something, some different type of physics. But that makes me think of something that I read about on your website. I think, if I'm not mistaken, did you hear someone tell you sorry, this will hurt?
I heard somebody say it was unfortunate that I felt pain.
Yeah, okay. So sorry that you feel pain. So that, of course, indicates some sort of recognition that you're being affected by this change in dimensionality or the technology they're using or whatever. That was a recognition. I mean, what do you think where did that voice come? Was that from the aliens, the kids that you saw, or was it
I
just a
have
voice in your head? I mean, did they give you any indication of their intention, anything like that?
no, I don't have any idea where the voice came from. To me, it sounded like it was somebody standing behind me in the
Mhm.
garage almost. But yet there wasn't anybody there that I could see. Of course, I couldn't turn around and look at that point, but I never saw who was speaking. At least I have no conscious memory of seeing who was speaking to me. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't know if I never felt, even in other experiences that I've had, a couple before that and a couple after, I've never felt whatever I was having contact with was actually malicious. I felt sometimes that it was kind of, it didn't, it was, its intention is not to hurt me. But it wasn't,
But in
it wasn't my bestie either. You know what I mean? Kind of like,
sort of indifference,
yeah, a little bit,
like we treat cattle or something. It's like,
maybe a
or,
little
or
better than
whatever,
that.
animals in
You
particular
know,
situations.
respect
It's
the life form, that's a life, but not much beyond that. You know what I mean?
exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
is this why I'm leading into Bud's work? Because I'd really like to hear you talk a little bit about working with Budd Hopkins.
Yeah, I would too. I would too.
Yeah, and so you get the feeling that there, from all the other experiences that we've interviewed people on in books and all that, you get the feeling that there's some agenda, of course, and that they understand that we are conscious and have feelings and everything, but the agenda is more important. So sometimes they don't really take into account how much it will affect your life, because here it is 40 years later and you're still trying to figure it out. Of course, the alternative is that you're part of something that you don't know you're part of. And that, is supported by the fact that a lot of times this runs in families too. That it seems far beyond coincidence that members in families over subsequent generations share these same experiences or tendencies towards being psychic or whatever, whereas other families have just nothing. So you're part of maybe a bloodline or something. And most of the guests, when we talk about that, they don't want to, they don't want to look at themselves like that. They don't want to say I'm special, but they also don't want to say that I'm a victim. So it's
Yeah.
up in the air what the whole familial connection is.
Mhm.
Anyway, Budd obviously found a very rich, case that's full of stuff to look at. And he passed away in 2011, is that right?
Yeah, 2011 or 2012,
Yeah,
somewhere
I
around
think
in there.
I saw, so it's been 13 years or something. Can you talk a little bit about working with Budd and tell us what kind of man and investigator and, just how he was in general?
I can tell you about him regarding my case and myself. I don't speak on anybody else, but I can tell you when I met him, he was probably one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. He was one of the most compassionate people I'd ever met. He really cared. And his whole family kind of took me in. Because I was a single mom, I didn't have a lot of money. I had to sell my washer and dryer to get money to come to New York the first time. And I was kind of freaked out about doing it because I didn't know this guy, but I was that desperate for help. And I'm so glad I did. If I hadn't met him, my life wouldn't be recognizable today. There would be nothing about my life today that would even be remotely recognizable. He was diligent. He was an artist. He wasn't a scientist, he wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a psychiatrist or anything, but he engaged all those people. He brought all those kinds of people into this case. When I stepped off that bus in New York City for the very first time, he took me directly to Dr. Clamar's office before he even took me to his studio. We left the bus station and went to Dr. Clamar's office, a psychiatrist. In retrospect, he probably wanted her to check me out, make sure I wasn't crazy. Well, like an axe murderer crazy. And because I was thinking to myself halfway there on the bus, what are you doing? You don't know this guy could be an axe murderer. And I, had a panic and another panic attack. But so, I mean, he had doctors that did CT scan of my brain and an EEG of my brain. He had psychiatrists that did verbal and written psychological testing that he did. He either got funding for it. I can't imagine he paid for this himself. I didn't have
Those
any
aren't
insurance.
cheap. Those
No,
are definitely not cheap
he either had somebody
diagnostics.
he had somebody that funded it, that paid for it, or they donated the time. I don't know how that all worked. All I know is I didn't have to pay for it and I couldn't. So, but it was at like Columbia Hospital, it was a big hospital in New York where I did all this testing. He arranged for me to have a voice stress test in Indiana from some police guy who did it blind, didn't even know what he was asking questions about. And at the end of the day, he told Budd told me, he said, I can't tell you whether UFOs are real or she's seen a UFO in her backyard, but I can tell you she believes she did. That's all I can tell you. So, but so he got all these professional people involved where he couldn't and put it all together. And he was brilliant in that he like set up this support group. He gave me a buddy. He assigned me a buddy, another experiencer, was older than me, who'd already been dealing with her stuff for a long time, who made herself available to me 24/7. I could call her anytime, day or night, if I was scared or something happened or I was thinking of things. And he set that buddy system up for us, and also had those he had support group meetings at his studio in New York, which I got to go to a couple when I was there. But back then you got to remember, this is 1983, the mid 80s. We didn't have the internet, didn't have cell phones. Most of my communication with Budd was done by letter writing, between mostly me writing him and some short phone calls. So he made several trips to Indiana in which he interviewed neighbors, friends, family members, anything he could find when he was in Indiana, he did. So, but he was in my case, he was meticulous and he took everything into account, even things that I told him that he was a little uncomfortable with, some more woo-woo stuff. Later on, you know, he heard it. I kind of grew out of it a little bit. I mean, I don't know how to put this. My mind and psyche and spiritual expansion through all this, because of all this forcing me. He always used to say, don't give them credit for what you did, you know, as far as growing and becoming stronger through it all. So he was definitely a little bit on the emergency room side of things. He saw the tore up people like me, and I'm sure that had an effect on his opinion of what was going on, you know. So because I think he was more you know, of a kind of negative about the contact, you know, was bad and they were hurting people and stuff, which, yeah, they were, but yet somehow I was better because of it. I don't know how to explain that, you know.
Well,
So,
the title of the book is Intruders, right? I mean,
yeah, right.
there's no hiding
Mm-mm.
the feeling about this. Now, you have to talk to the experiencers to know what the real emotions that eventually shake
Mhm.
out of the experience are. And it sounds to
Exactly.
me that you're saying that it was a thing that happened and I've learned certain things and I've gone a different direction in my life than I probably would have otherwise. And it's just what it is. It's
Mhm.
not, now some people have repeated contacts though. I think of Whitley Strieber and, of course there are others that have an ongoing thing and it can be terrorizing or it can be a thing that you find some sort of whatever symbiotic relationship, a complementary relationship. What how would you describe your relationship with these intruders or these others or just this intelligence that you've
This
become aware of?
yeah, this non-human intelligence. I mean, when I was young, it scared the hell out of me. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't go looking for it. I didn't ask for it. It just was. It was a part of my life, and I was going to either have to learn how to deal with it or let it kill me. Pick one. And I wasn't ready to die. I had two kids to raise, you know. And I I don't know. I I had a memory of being told by something somewhere sometime that fear would slow my process so that I needed to work on not being afraid because I'm still here and I'm still alive. And you know, it, if they were going to kill everybody, you know, they'd have done it a long time ago because they sure can, you know what I mean? So I had to keep reminding myself of that, but at, at some point, I think it was about 92, the physical contact stopped basically. No more visits in the bedroom at night, you know, like when I was first married, and no more painful stuff, no more scary stuff. Something changed. And I started having lucid dreams more often, informational dreams, and more paranormal activity started to ramp up with paranormal and like I could twist up spoons and you know just kind of I started being able to feel people and sense people, and I began to realize that there's some people walking around here right around amongst us that they're not what you think, they're not who you think they are, they're right here, and I know I can feel them when I walk past them now. Something in me changed. June 30, 83, the switch got flipped somewhere, and I grew some new wire harnesses somewhere. You know what I mean? A new connection was made. It isn't that it's any different than anybody else. It's just that mine got turned on or something. I mean, and I started getting interested in science stuff. I started having these visions of black holes and energy coming around, and drawn pictures of, I drew something called Casey's bubbles. It was a big glob of bubbles where little bubbles touch. And then somebody told me that's what universes look like. I'm like, you know, I don't know who told me that, but I mean, so I said, my brain was a tube type radio in Adobe digital surround sound world, and I got an upgrade. I got a new circuit board. But
Mhm.
and that, our brains are, something told me our brains are wired. We can't perceive what we're not made to receive. I'm sitting in a room right now that's full of Wi-Fi signals, television signals, radio signals, all kinds of stuff flying around in here. I can't see none of it. My
You can't see
TV,
it.
no, but my television can pick up the TV signal.
Right.
My little transistor radio can pick up the radio signal. My computer's picking up the Wi-Fi signal, but that's what they're made for. Our brains are made only for a little sliver of something, but that's going to change. I feel like that's changing right now. And I don't know why, but I feel like the contact that I've had has something to do with it.
Well,
I don't know.
I'll throw it back to Dan after. This is my final question here, and it's really what you're explaining here, in that you didn't ask for this, but it looks like you're accepting the role, whatever it ultimately turns out to be. As far as I can see, you're doing two things. One is you're being a guinea pig for the upgrade, the physical upgrade. You're being connected in certain ways to maybe expanded consciousness, whatever that means. But you're also very compelled to talk about it. And I think that's the big key, because the more people there are like you, Deb, who are okay with talking about it. They don't care if it makes them seem crazy. They can afford to do it because it's important. We need people to talk about it, and we need people to be upgraded in this way if there's an ultimate goal of raising us all up to the next level, whatever that is. Of course, there's all sorts of cliches for that, rising in awareness, or upping our vibration, those sorts of airy-fairy kind of new agey stuff. But when you really look at the evidence from a scientific perspective, there are lots and lots of people like you who seem perfectly normal, and I'm sure Dan would agree with me on that. And you feel like you have a job to do, and you're just doing the job. So I would say thank you for doing that, for being willing to talk about this, because it does put you at risk. It does put your family at risk of being, on some level ridiculed, although thankfully today we're not quite like we were in the 80s. Like you said,
Yeah.
everyone just, oh, you're the crazy family on the block.
Yeah.
Not like that anymore. It's much
No,
more accepting, and it's because we've become more aware, and because there's more evidence, frankly. So anyway, thank you for doing that and being willing to stand up. And Dan, I'll give you the last words here if you'd like.
Well, I don't know about last words, but
The next question.
okay. Yeah, because me it sounds like I might not be here after these last words. But Deb, do you know anything about OPUS? OPUS? OPUS?
I've heard that before. I don't know. I've heard the word before. I'm not sure.
Because as we're going through this conversation, I'm thinking you would be an asset to OPUS. Stands for the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. So what I'm going to suggest, and we don't need to talk about it here, I'm going to email you my phone number, and at
Okay.
your convenience, I want you to call me and let's have a discussion about
Okay.
OPUS. But I'm really appreciative of you coming on with us. I feel like there's a lot of things we could have talked about, but we haven't talked about. So maybe we could even do a part 2 at some point in time.
Sure. I'm 65 years old, and I've been having strange things happen to me practically my whole life, so I could talk for days.
Yeah. And Dan, your phone number is up above your shoulder for us.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That is
Yeah,
his phone number.
you can look, because I have my business card as my
Or
backdrop.
send an email, and because you have Dan's and
Yeah.
probably mine. But it's just something it's good to talk about. The more we talk about it, the more normalized it gets,
Mhm.
the more likely other people are to come forward and say, yeah, I had this thing and I didn't know how to deal with it, but I
Well,
have
I'll tell you what,
support.
for every person out there like me, I believe with all my heart that for every person out there like me who's out willing to talk about it, and I don't care whether you think I'm crazy or not, I would too if I were you and hadn't lived it. There are probably 50,000 people that have maybe even crazier, more outrageous stories than me that ain't going to tell anybody. And I'm here to tell them. I feel like it's my destiny. It's my job, as you would say, to tell them that it's okay. You know, go ahead and tell us.
That's why OPUS is so important, because that's an organization that has your point of view that can help people.
Now,
So
one more, Deb. Sorry, Dan. I'm gonna cut you off. I just want to, without thinking or analyzing, Deb, can you just give us your, your first thought about whether there is a plan behind this whole thing? I mean, what's the end result, the goal, if there is one?
On first thought, I would say survival.
Okay, of our species or of others or all
of humanity.
We need to figure this out and figure out how to deal with it, or
and I mean, I feel like human beings don't realize how powerful they are and how powerful their thoughts are. You're more than just your body. There's a lot more, and people have forgotten who they are or what they're capable of, and the world would be such a better place if they would just remember. So
Dan?
I would agree. Well, Deb, thanks again for your time. Let's have a
thanks for the
private
opportunity.
conversation about OPUS, and maybe we can connect down the road again.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay,
Thanks,
have
Deb.
a good evening.
Enlightening. You too, Dan.
Thank
Yeah, see
you.
you, Dave.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
If I can cause us to go by here. There we go. Bye-bye.